Thanks, Lisa, and thanks everybody who does service at this meeting. It's great to be here. Um, oh, right. Sorry, just set the timer. Um, yeah, I mean, I've come here to talk about Promise One, but also we chatted before the meeting, and it doesn't all have to. It's like not a lecture, is it? It's certainly not a lecture. It's just my experience, strength, and hope. I'm a little bit nervous. But I did some before the meeting started. I just did some reading. I centered myself. I did some breathing. I contacted higher power, and I wrote some notes. I might not use any of the notes, but it helped me to kind of center myself. I'm not very good at deciding what I'm going to say, and I don't have a thing kind of all sorted. But I'll just tell you just a quick about how I got to Coda. I'm in my 60s. I've been in a relationship now for 32 years with my partner, Jennifer. And I'm in recovery also for all of that time. I got into recovery before we met from alcohol addiction. And I mean, so grateful and so happy as well for all of that, and for the kind of many years of sobriety that I've been blessed with, and the incredible friends and relationships that I had and that I have in that fellowship. And I kind of thought things were okay. I read a bit about codependence. I could spot it in other people really well, and not so much in myself. But I didn't read any of the Coda material, but kind of other books that are around. And I kind of thought, yeah. Early on, I was given a book by my sponsor in the other program, and actually, I thought that kind of had more to do with my partner than it had to do with me. So there we go. That was, it's like, yeah, denial. And but yeah, over the years I kind of thought, yeah, I'm probably codependent, but it's not serious, is it? I can deal with this just by reading a few books and stuff like that, and that'll do. And then 5 years ago, lots and lots of things happened. I got cancer, and I was dealing with that. My partner had lost both her parents. She was dealing with that, and also the thought of losing me. It was a very weird time. We got a property in the United States. So we were kind of half living in the States and half living here in the UK. And then my partner decided for herself that she really needed to do something, which meant that she had to be there for a long time, for quite not a long time, but more often. And I immediately went into rejection and fear and rage. I mean, it just shocked me what came up with me. Jealousy, fear, rage, anger, grief, all actually very understandable things given the circumstances. But I didn't know that, and I didn't know how to handle my feelings, and I didn't know how to not be like horrendous about it, and I knew about powerlessness and stuff like that, but this was something that I was powerless over. And it really did shock me, and I kept trying to get myself back on the straight and narrow. I'd be horrible to my partner, I'd drive her away, just all, just, and and then I'd go, no, come on, get myself together, and I'd read something, and I'd ring her up, and I'd go, oh, I'm really sorry, and stuff like that. Anyway, long and short of it was I was trying to deal with this disease of codependence by myself, and also was in deep denial about having it. So I just really thank God, my higher power, that I decided to come to CODA. And there'd been a meeting open close to us, one meeting a week on a Sunday. And I've been meaning to get to it for quite a long time. And then I just decided to go one day. And I went to that meeting and I heard the patterns and characteristics being read out. And it was like, oh, okay. All right. I can so recognize myself in all this. And I need to come here. And so I did. At that point, I was feeling that my relationship with my partner was over. I was in deep grief. I was trying to deal with my feelings about being ill, and I just, the relief that I got from coming to CODA and really just kind of putting the focus on starting to take care of myself and starting to be able to acknowledge and give myself permission to have my feelings rather than just kind of brush them away all the time out of fear of rejection, out of fear of sarcasm, out of all kinds of fears, it was such relief. And I started coming to meetings regularly. And slowly things changed for me and my partner. We were still together. My partner's in recovery in CODA also now. And I'm so grateful for that because there's a level of honesty that I was never able to have in my relationship. My thing in relationships was that I just wanted, I would just try to hide, So if I was challenged, say for instance, this situation, Jennifer was friendly with people in the States. I was incredibly jealous and I was incredibly threatened by it. But there was like a couple of people that I weren't jealous of. So, I'd say, no, I'm not jealous. I'm not jealous of your friends, because there was these two people that I weren't jealous of, and it was like, no, well, it's, I'm jealous of her because she is this and she is that. And so I'm kind of blaming this person. And I'm jealous of her because you are like this with her, And so there was, all of the time it was like I could not support myself in my feelings. I just couldn't. And I'd never learned to do that. And I hadn't realized that. So coming to CODA was like a total eye-opener for me. And I knew I'd come from a very, very toxic family background, really violent. I was the eldest child. Physically, my dad was physically violent towards me since I was a baby, and I'm grateful that I survived, but that violence continued all the way through my childhood and to my mum as well. My dad was incredibly sarcastic, judging, cold, and violent. And I left home at 16, and I kind of thought I had control. I thought I could control the circumstances of my life. That was my mission, was like, I'm leaving that all behind me and I'm going to reinvent myself. And this is what I'm going to be from now on. And, I tried very hard to do that, but so none of it was really kind of based on honesty and, authenticity. I was scared of people. I didn't trust anybody, and I just tried to hide it all my life. I tried to kind of build this, kind of front up. And I'm one of those people, as I said before, I turned to alcohol to help me to do that, and to give me some kind of release and some kind of persona, this kind of good time person, persona, until that all kind of fell apart. So Yeah, and but I'd never really examined it in the way that I came to be able to do in Coda. And working the Coda program for me has been an incredible experience of gentleness, kindness, self-acceptance, self-love, just all of the things that I was lacking. I thought I had to be hard on myself because I was brought up that way. I thought I had to, kind of try harder, work harder, do better, be better, and all the time. And so I lived with this kind of constant fear of I'm just not good enough. I'm really not good enough. And I have to, I have to somehow work out, how I can be better. And when I look back at that, when I look at the enormity of that, I kind of lived with this level of stress and tension and fear for my entire life. It's quite staggering. And the other thing that I lived with my entire life was this feeling of deep shame that I can't let you know who I am. I'm steeped in shame. There is no way, that I can trust anybody. Um, I'm just ashamed about everything. And I didn't know that, I didn't know it. And so, for instance, before I came to Coda, I was trying to share as honestly I could in my other program, and not realizing that it's not the right place to do that. That I'm not going to get the kind of support that I needed there for what was going on for me, which were these feelings of, my life falling apart. And so there was this whole thing, I've been sober all these years, what are people going to think, and I was deeply ashamed of myself. I was deeply ashamed of my sharing. I was deeply ashamed. So I was going to meetings, sharing and coming away and going, oh my God, this is just awful. So, finding Coda and finding a place where I could, just kind of realize, what I'd been trying to deal with my entire life. And, that whole thing about kind of, my codependence being a protection, it really made sense to me. I tried the best I could to protect this incredibly vulnerable person. And when I look back, I've been vulnerable all my life. And so, yeah. So anyway, that's the background, and I came to Coda, and very lucky, I found a co-sponsor who'd also been in another program for addiction quite a while. And the idea of being able to have co-sponsor really excited me, because I had never known that relationship. And of course, like any relationship, it excited me and it scared the life out of me at the same time. And but I asked this person, actually, we were going to start a step group together, and there was just 3 of us interested, and then one of the people dropped out. And so we just kind of said, well, shall we co-sponsor each other then? So that's how that happened. So we fell into that, and we still work together. We work through the steps, we work through the traditions. At the moment, we're working through the 12-piece relationship toolkit. And that's been an incredibly, valuable relationship for me. And at the same time, there's a certain level of fear about it, because I'm always, not so much now, but I've always been on that thing like something's going to go wrong, something, I'm going to blow it, or he's going to blow it, or it's just, something's going to go wrong. We also do service together at East Kent Coda, and at region level as well, and meeting levels. And so, yeah, it's just been such a great relationship, and it's been fantastic to have such a kind of solid recovery relationship, and I feel very, very blessed to have that. So anyway, I just want to talk about the promises a bit. I did write at the top of this piece of paper, and I started making notes. In Promise 1, I see how much I and all my relationships have been controlled by my fears. And you know, just seeing that has been really important, you know, because that a new sense of belonging, the feelings of emptiness and loneliness will disappear. Right away I just go, no, no, I don't think so. That's not going to happen for me. And anyway, I'm not going to get close enough to even find out, you know, because you know, I've always been really scared of people, and the idea of belonging to something scares me because of my codependent fears, because of the fears that, and I wrote some of them down. I mean, the patterns that come to mind is I've already made up my mind that I can take care of myself without any help from you. I do not perceive myself as lovable or a worthwhile person, and you're going to find that out. I have trouble setting healthy priorities and boundaries, so I'm going to be overwhelmed by you. I want to avoid rejection at all costs, so it's best I keep a distance. I'm hypervigilant regarding other people's feelings, so again, I'm going to get swamped. It's best I don't belong. And I crave approval. You know, so if I kind of belong to this group and open myself up, then, you know, you're not going to like me. And I'm judgmental. I withhold expressions of appreciation, and I don't want to feel vulnerable, and I don't want you to find out all these nasty things about me, you know. So this whole thing about belonging, you know, I remember when I got to my other fellowship, at first I just thought, you know, oh, you know, this is great. These people can help me, and I'll go to the meetings, and I'll do what's required. I'll do anything. You know, I'd hit that level of desperation. I'll do anything. You know, I'll get a sponsor. I'll do the steps. I'll do service. I'll do anything. And but I'm not going to have friends here. And just right away, it was like, I am not going, you know, to be, you know, because friends, people knowing me means vulnerability. People knowing me means that you might hold up a mirror, and I'm not going to like it, and I'm not going to like you, and I'm not going to like me. So all my relationships have to be really tightly controlled, you know, and for me to feel safe. So this sense of belonging is terrifying. You know. At the same time, I really need it, you know, because I can't live like that, you know. And I did try, and I think that if I'd been able to, then I would have managed to achieve it, but I couldn't. So so yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, but I was so mistrustful, you know, of people that the promises just scared me, you know, the whole lot, and especially that first one, sense of belonging. You know, really because of my sense of alienation. People can't be trusted, you know, and also in relationships, I needed to know where I stood. Was I better than you? Was I worse than you? Was, you know, all of this, you know, all of this was going on in any relationship that I had. So, you know, coming to Coda and coming to meetings, and as I said before, gradually, you know, I'm just checking the time, you know, just gradually keep coming back, and, you know, hearing the welcome at every meeting was just, it was so incredibly healing for me. And I remember the first time I heard it, I just thought, oh my God, I really belong here, and I really need this. And again, right on the back of that, the feeling of fear comes up right away, which goes, I really need this, but, you know, what happens if I blow it? You know, what happens if they don't like me? What happens if I, you know, what happens if I fall out with people? What happens, you know, all of that stuff. But, you know, I did know enough about recovery to know that all I needed to do was keep coming back. And so I did, and you know, I did put it on hold. I just kind of went, you know what, I'm just going to turn up to the meetings and see what happens. And you know, really quickly, I realized that it was just exactly what I wanted. So the patterns and characteristics as well were just like amazing for me too. I just, you know, I could see myself in so many of them, and they were just so helpful in kind of in terms of like helping me sort out what actually is going on here. And I use them a lot. I use the recovery patterns, and I ask myself, you know, I'll read the recovery patterns and I'll kind of go, yeah, am I able to support myself in this? Am I able to do this and that? So yeah, as I said, I kept coming back. So, and I started feeling quite safe in meetings. And part of that for me was doing service. Um, I've pretty much always done service, either at meetings or at, you know, region levels. And you know, I'm you know, I'm aware of the other thing around that is that, you know, my hand will go up. You know, I'll do it. I'll do it. You know, approval. I want to be liked. You know. At the same time, I know that it connects me. And so that's like that's a kind of balancing act, you know. And so I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not going to get it all perfect. And when I first came to Coda, you know, I ended up with not when I first came to Coda, but after a few years, I ended up with like kind of too many sponsees and, you know, and too much service and stuff like that. And right now at this moment I'm stepping back, and that feels good. But that's a kind of balance, and again, that's the kind of, it's the thing that I don't have to get right. But I love the fact that there's the kind of, there's that eye on it in Coda, in terms of, you know, doing too much and being too eager, and you know, for me it's kind of, you know, like me, you know. But having said that, service has just made me feel safe in meetings, and that's really huge for me. I hadn't really realized how unsafe and the level of fear that and vulnerability that I had, that I can have, until I came to Coda, because I spent so much of my life trying to repress it, you know, and trying to make it something else, trying to deny it. And now I do. Now I do respect it, and I also don't insist that I'm not like that. And that's like another thing that I did to myself. I would insist. I'd go, right, okay, come on, sort this out now. You know, it's like this. You know, you're feeling vulnerable. Come on, sort yourself out. And yeah, that kind of, as I said before, you know, my journey in Coda has been one of kind of self-acceptance and love, and it's been the most important thing for me. I'm feeling I'm kind of yeah, I'll just let myself speak. You know, the thing came up. It was like, oh, this is being filmed, you know, and I'm kind of struggling, you know, but it doesn't matter. I know that as well. It just doesn't matter. Yeah, so back to service. So as I said before, I do service with my co-sponsor, and we do things like we put on conventions, and you know, we're both active in service in the meetings, and there's a message in the chat box as well about the UK Codependence Matters speaker meeting as well, which was modelled on this meeting. And you know, we've managed to go for a few years now with finding speakers every week, which is no mean feat in Coda, I've found. You know, it's been but you know, being involved in that committee and group conscience meetings in Coda have just been, again, for me, so wonderful. You know, I've learned that I don't have to dominate, you know, to feel safe. And that was another thing for me. It was like, if I could dominate, I'd feel safe. Well, I'd feel safe for that moment, but then I'd come away from the meeting and I'd be full of shame. I'd be going, I shouldn't have spoken to that person like that. Oh, I bet they don't like me. I bet, and all of this stuff would be going around in my head. So I've learned in regular group conscious meetings. So I go to 3 meetings a week. I've been coming to Coda for 5, maybe 6 years. I go to 3 regular meetings a week and other various things. So I go to 3 group conscious meetings a month. We have regular group conscious meetings. And that's been incredible. It's been incredible for me to just kind of sit there and, kind of listen to that process and learn to trust higher power. And I've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to talk now about just kind of leading on to higher power. I'm just going to talk about my relationship to higher power since I came to Coda. I was very, over the years, I've been very kind of unsure about a relationship to a higher power, whether I needed it or what. I mean, I knew it was kind of part of the program, and I wanted to have one because I wanted to, I wanted to fit in, and I wanted to prove to you that I was kind of good recoverer person and all kinds of stuff. Again, all of this codependent stuff. It's all about you. Not about me. And one day I was with I came to Coda, and it was quite a while after. Me and my partner were still kind of at loggerheads. We were just really, it was just awful. And one day I was in the car with my partner and she was talking. I wanted to hurt her. I wanted to say something nasty about her friend, this person who she was friends with, who I was jealous of, who I was denying. I wanted to say something nasty. And I knew if I did, she would reciprocate. And I just sat there and I just breathed. And I just breathed to higher power. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't do anything else. I just sat there and I just breathed to higher power and I didn't say anything. And you know what? Nothing happened. There wasn't a row. There was peace in the car. I didn't say the horrible thing. We weren't at each other's throats. And I just sat there for a little while and I so wanted to say something. And I just carried on breathing and I just carried on breathing and it carried me through. And that was really, I think, my first real conscious contact with a higher power. And I think I've been searching my whole life, but that happened. And I remembered that. And so I set a boundary for myself. Coda, this was the first time that I'd heard about boundaries. I set a boundary for myself. I said to myself, before you say anything nasty, breathe. And so I did that. And every time it worked. And then one time I broke that boundary. She said something and I said something right away, very quick, very sarcastic, which I thought was very funny as well. I was quite proud of it. And so kind of zzz, and right away we were at loggerheads. And I just thought, there you go. That's what happens when I'm in charge. That's the thing, isn't it? And so it was really in Coda that I learned to let go. And I look back at that and I think, oh my God, all of my life, I never felt safe enough to let go. And now, after coming to Coda for a year or so, and really kind of learning about myself, learning about my codependent behavior, studying with a co-sponsor and coming to the meetings and all of this lot, I'm finally ready to trust a higher power and let go. And just really let go. no control, no nothing. And so that was an incredible thing. And that's what's happened since, is that I connect to my higher power through breathing. And I sometimes pray, but it feels awkward. You know, we prayed before the meeting, and I kind of prayed because I thought, oh, I better, because, you know, I want people to like me. You know, here I am, you know, with my codependent behavior, and I did. I felt awkward, you know, but you know what I did after that was I just breathed, and you know, I'm never going to be fixed, you know, I'm never going to be perfect, you know, but I can keep coming back, and I can keep on this road of recovery and healing, which has just been such a blessing for me and so amazing. And that brings me up to my time. Thanks so much for listening to me.
It is working. My name is Lisa, and I am a recovering codependent, and I love the Fellowship of Codependents Anonymous. And thank you all so much. The love is real, and I seriously appreciate it. I would like to say thank you to Annie. I very much appreciated what you shared, identified with a lot. And yeah, I love when we can come together as a fellowship worldwide. It's a beautiful thing, just beautiful. So the last few weeks have been a little challenging. Both my husband and I have come down with COVID. He had no symptoms. I had symptoms. He wrecked his car a few days ago, and we're down to one car and 2 jobs, and it's just been a delightful time. And so that's what I'm here with right now. But, you know, I was looking at the word belonging in Promise Number 1, and I very much appreciated the perspective that Annie brought, because it's radically different from the one that I brought in. So I'm always amazed at how one word can just mean such different things to each person. And so I'm actually inspired to share about my experience with the word belonging. So I've been in CODA for a little while. And I came here a very broken young woman. I was ready to drive my car off a cliff over some guy that I cannot even remember his name. It's kind of like that. And I started my recovery journey in CODA. And when I came to CODA, what I would have told you is that I was the black sheep of my family. I came from a perfect family. My mother and father were married until the day my mother passed away. And I have a sister who's perfect and never did anything wrong. And my family did all these wonderful, loving things. And I was the mess up of the family. And about 3 months into my journey in CODA, I discovered that it is nearly impossible to work a 12-step program and drink alcoholically. And so I recognized I had a drinking problem, and I got sober. And in both programs, but particularly CODA was the place where I began to learn the truth. I began to learn the truth about myself, about my family of origin, and about this idea of belonging. And so what began to unravel as I worked the program of Codependents Anonymous, and I would like to also point out that we didn't have all the beautiful literature that you have right now. That's how long I've been around. And so we had to use whatever was available to learn about CODA, to work the steps, etc. It still works. And if you're in a country or area that doesn't have the literature yet, fight for it, because it's worth it. It's worth it. Anyway, that's just my little plug for literature. So what began to unravel for me was that the family history and the family story that I didn't really know all the details of. So the brief view of that is that my father was abandoned when he was 1.5 years old. In fact, he and his 2 brothers and sister were abandoned when he was 1.5 years. He was the youngest. His mother, this would have been in the 30s, hung out with bikers and was running off wherever she wanted to. I think the last time they counted, she had like about 14 marriage licenses. And eventually later on, when I knew her, when I was a little older, she was mentally ill. The person that my father thought was his father It turned out he learned about 2 years ago, due to all the genetic testing that's available, that was not his father. It was actually his mother's stepfather. This is the family I came from. My mother grew up in an alcoholic home. Her mother and father were both alcoholics, functioning, high functioning alcoholics. She was sent away to boarding school. She was also sent to her maternal grandparents' home, where she was sexually abused from the time she was 5 years old until she was 11, and had no memory of it until she was in her like 40s and 50s, around menopause years is when it all came back to her. And so these things began to come out, and I'm like, oh, well, maybe my family wasn't so perfect after all. In addition to all of this, my father was put into the foster care program. I hope that translates to other cultures and areas, but where he was put into other families' homes. And so I thought it was normal to have 3 grandmas. I didn't know that not everybody had 3 grandmas and grandpas. So that was kind of cool. And so as part of giving back, my father wanted to take in foster children. And this is where the word belonging takes a meaning for me. I was the oldest of 2 children. My mother actually lost 4 children. And at some point when I was about 7.5, 8 years old, my parents took in 2 girls. Both of them were older than me. One of them left and one of them stayed for 9 years. I was no longer the oldest in the family, and my role changed. So I went from being the oldest to being in the middle. And it never occurred to me until I got into recovery that my place in the family no longer fit. I didn't have a place. And in fact, physically, all of them were brunette and I was a redhead. I didn't even look like them. Like my foster sister actually fit in better than I did when you looked at them visually. I remember showing my first sponsor that. She went, oh my goodness, look at this. And I went, I never thought of that. And so I share this with you because what I learned through my early recovery years was that I was striving to find out and figure out, where do I belong? Every choice I made, every relationship I got into, every little club I joined, or whatever I did, that was the nagging, call it a silver thread running through everything, was, where do I belong? I never felt like I belonged anywhere. And I was constantly looking. And I've often remembered when I was in high school, and there were these 2 people standing in front of the vending machine, students. And I don't remember what the source of the conversation was, but I remember hearing one of them say, well, you know how I am. And I thought, that's a best friend. That's belonging. I didn't have that. I did not have a best friend. I didn't have any of that. It was a challenging time for me growing up. I did not understand what was going on for me or what was happening. I knew that I grew up with a very controlling father, and that often happens when somebody is abandoned and put in the foster care system. They want a very rigid, controlled family life so that everything is just so, because it cannot look anything like history. And then, of course, my mom, not recognizing that she had been sexually abused, she had a lot of interesting behaviors as well. Both of them came in with the family disease of alcoholism, but neither of them had the actual family disease. They had other issues that they dealt with. My father was a workaholic. Both of them smoked. My mother was morbidly obese pretty much my entire life. And so fast forward a little bit, I'm in high school. I've been a very compliant, easygoing kid until sometime in middle school. So that's like 7th, 8th grade. And I don't know how much y'all know about compliance, but compliance can work for so long until there's this explosion. And it often happens in those wonderful, exciting teenage years. And that was me. I will never forget the teachers calling my mother going, what happened to our nice Lisa? She was always so nice. And now she's like exploding all over the place. So anyway, and I've never forgotten that, because it was like, yeah, she's gone. She's not here anymore, because here's Lisa, right? And At some point when I was about 17 years old, 16, 17 years old, I got really sick. I had to stay home for about a month. And that's when I began drinking and acting out sexually, promiscuous, and that sort of thing. And that went downhill pretty quickly within about a year. And then I ran away from home. And not wanting to go into huge details around that, the next 9 years would see me going from relationship to relationship, looking for the answer to that question. Where do I belong? I had a group of friends that I hung out with until that disbanded. I've been married several times, looking for the place where I belong. And I actually thought I had found it at one point in a long-term marriage that I will touch on later. So again, fast forward, I'm ready to drive my car off a cliff. My therapist is talking to me about codependency. She hands me a book that many of us are familiar with that I will not mention out of respect to our traditions. And I remember going into her one day, because, in the back of this book, she talks about 12-step programs. And I asked her, I said, do you think I should go to a 12-step program? And she's like, yeah, I think so. So I started looking for a 12-step program. And the first one didn't want me. I later found out that wasn't completely true, but the person that I went to meet with about it, she kind of said, nah, you don't belong here. And I went, okay. So then I went to the next program, and they meet with you before you go to a meeting. And she said, I don't really think you belong here. And I was about to hit that, oh shit, here I am again, I don't belong. And she says, but let me tell you about CODA. And so I found CODA in Santa Cruz, California. And I love to put in my little plug for Santa Cruz, California, because it's a beautiful, wonderful, spiritually healing place. It's also the place where at that time, tie-dye was still in fashion. And I would meet people named Star and Rainbow and Eagle, and you could find any spiritual practice, loving anything that you were looking for, it was there. And you could come from any background, like literally any background. It was just an amazing place to find recovery. And CODA meetings, at that time, CODA was huge. There were 30 or 40 people in a meeting every night. And we met in the basement of a county building. So you literally had to walk down a flight of stairs into this really dark room. They even let us have candles. That was before all the fire stuff came up, and we could have candlelit meetings, and you would set up the room, and it was an amazing place. And I have to tell you, the first time I walked in, I found my people and I belonged. And it was the first time in a really, really, really long time that I thought, maybe, just maybe, I found the place where I belong. Just maybe. It was still scary. It was still overwhelming. I came in hating everybody. I hated men, I hated women, I hated y'all. I hated everybody. And most of all, I hated myself, is really what it came down to. But I found a place where I belonged, and I started going to meetings every day. And I remember hearing, I got to find a sponsor. I thought, okay, I'm not willing to speak at the group level, and I wasn't. That was too scary, but I was willing to talk with one person, and I don't know if it was higher power, universe, whatever you want to call it, but something in me said, if I don't find one person that I'm willing to open up to, I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to stay. And so that was a motivator for me. And I remember asking the first person, she's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm all booked up. I'm like, oh, I still had that motivation. And I remember sitting in the meeting and I heard this woman's name, and I'm like, I need to go ask her. So after the meeting, I ran up to her because I was sure everybody else wanted to ask her too. Because, I'm like that. I think that way. It's all or nothing, black and white. And I asked her, and she says, well, sure, let's meet and talk. And so we went for coffee somewhere, because that's what we do. And I remember sitting across from her, and she said, so what brought you to CODA? Now, here's another thing I had never done in my life, because, I had typically been a pretty compliant kid person, that sort of thing. And I remember thinking, ooh. And I looked at her and I said, why should I trust you? Now, that was pretty ballsy coming from a girl like me, knowing where I came from. And she looked at me and she says, "Oh, yeah, right. I'm supposed to tell you about me. And then that will help you to feel more comfortable to tell me about you." And so she went on to tell me this story of her, not only her family history, but her history of being married, having children, sexual abuse from her spouse towards a child, prison involved, all kinds of stuff. And I went, oh, wow. And I was willing to open up and tell her what I knew. I didn't know much at that time. All of those things that I had told you that had come around came over time as I began to share. And so I immediately got into working the steps. I called her every day. Now, this was before cell phones and text messaging and the internet and emails. So all we had was the answering machine, you know, it had the crappy tape because they weren't even digital yet. And so she could always count on coming home. And when her little light was blinking on the answering machine, at least one of those would be me. Every day, I was that desperate, that broken, and that in need of help. I mean, I don't have another way to put it. I was just in need of help. And so as a result of attending meetings, I learned about being of service. Now, CODA wasn't nearly as organized at that point as it is now, which still can use some help because, you know, there's way more service than there are people to do it. And most of us know about this. However, when I joined AA, they didn't have that problem. They actually had a lot going on and a lot more structure. And so I actually had more opportunities to be of service there than I did in CODA, but I was still in service with CODA. But in AA, I had opportunities to join groups and committees that were putting on conventions. And again, talking about a sense of belonging, talking about, okay, now I belong. How do I get along with all of you? How do I get along with myself? You know, because, ugh, that was like awful. And service work gave me those opportunities. And then as CODA became a little more organized and there was a lot more opportunities for service, I had some opportunities at the local and regional and world level to do service with other recovering codependents. So maybe you guys know what that's like. I don't know, but to have a room full of codependents trying to make a decision is really interesting, you know, because everybody wants to be nice and nobody wants to step on anyone's toes, or you got the one who doesn't give a shit and they're going to step on anybody everywhere. You know, they don't care. I mean, you get the whole variety, right? And probably one of my favorite service recovery stories, I had the absolute privilege and opportunity to serve on the board of trustees for CODA. And we were at a face-to-face meeting and we all decided to go grocery shopping as a group. So there's like 8 or 9 of us at the grocery store. And I kid you not, we've got one person pushing the cart or the buggy with a list, and they're making sure we get all the healthy stuff and they're ticking off all the things. We've got 2 or 3 dancing down the aisles. Don't know where they went. And we had various others as well. And I thought, wow, this is what it's about. This is where it's at, you know? And I was sharing with somebody the other day about the opportunities to be of service and what it means to belong. And so when I became the chair of the board, at my very first face-to-face board meeting, we'd been together for 6 months, but we hadn't actually met face-to-face yet. And at the very first meeting, on the very first day, I had 2 people screaming, "Fuck you," at each other from across the room. And I remember sitting there going, oh, this is not good. And the reason I bring it up is because it would have been very easy for us to say, you're out. And in fact, one of the members came back and was sure that that person was going to get thrown off the board. And I remember sitting there going, you know what? We don't shoot our wounded here. We actually surround our wounded, and sometimes the still suffering codependent is sitting in the room with me right there. And in that moment, as a group, we did something called a group inventory. And the group inventory, for those that are not familiar with it, it's what the step 4 and 5 are to the individual, a group inventory is to the group. The group can actually take an assessment of how they're doing. Are you meeting your primary purpose? How are your relationships with each other? Are people hanging around in your group? Are they leaving? Are you having issues and difficulties? And as a result of doing that group inventory based on that experience that happened, we came together and we were strong together. And again, in the context of belonging, it helped me, I'll speak for myself, it helped me to realize that even if I mess up in the most ugly, horrible way, there's a way for us to come together and work together and still belong. Like I don't have to get thrown out because I messed up, because you know that's pretty much what happened when I ran away from home, is that things got so bad that's all I knew was to leave. You know, the other part of the first promise, the feeling of emptiness and loneliness will disappear. I don't know if you guys know what this is like, but I know what it's like to be in a room with 100 people and feel alone. I know what it's like to be in a room full of 100 people and I can find the sickest person in that room and feel attracted to that person too. I mean, the things that can happen as a result of that emptiness and loneliness. And you know, for me, the emptiness and loneliness was a spiritual dilemma for me. It didn't have to do with people. It had to do with my higher power. And so one of the other things that comes together for me around this was I wanted a relationship that was going to last. And I thought I had that in my previous marriage of 20 years. And when that marriage ended, I was devastated. However, the gift of that devastation for me was the realization that my relationship with my higher power never ended as a result of that relationship. In fact, my higher power relationship, my relationship with my higher power would be with me lifetime. And for me, that was the solution to emptiness and loneliness. And that took a lot of time because I'd been in program, I'm just going to say a long time. I don't like to throw out numbers. And I was talking about this with my husband, my current husband, the other day, because it's not about the numbers. I have met people with 25 years in program. I want nothing they got. I've met people with 2 or 3 years and I'm like, wow, how did you do that? Because it took me a little longer than 2 or 3 years to get that, you know? And so it's about quality, not quantity. And the other thing that I love to focus on is that in AA, they talk a lot about the 24-hour program. We just stay sober for 24 hours and we just do this thing for 24 hours. Well, you know what? Sometimes I have a codependent slip within 10 minutes of waking up. And it's like, gosh darn it, there's no perfection here. But you know what? Just for today, in this 24-hour period, I ask my higher power to help me be the best version of me that I can be. And sometimes I can't do 24 hours. Sometimes I can only do 1 hour. Sometimes I can do 5 minutes. And you know, there are some times, and it hasn't been that long ago, where it was just the next breath. Like, God, help me take the next breath. Because I'm not sure if I'm going to make it to the next one after that without doing something really foolish, really acting out in a codependent way. So I'd like to wrap up because I really want to hear from all of you. I love the program of Codependence Anonymous. I love what it brought for me and what it did for me. I actually grew up in CODA. Like I came in and I was about a teenager most times and acting that way as well. And more times than not in these days, I am a mature, grown woman who has an inner child, who has an inner teenager, who has a higher power, and who is working really hard to do this thing. And my greatest joy, privilege, and pleasure is to carry the message of recovery in whatever way that my higher power wants me to do that. And I also believe that it's important for me to know when it's time to step aside and let somebody else show up. So I'm putting in a shameless plug for this group. We need people. And if you are at all moved by what you hear here, what you've seen here, how you've seen this work, we could use your help. We could, because there's some beautiful stuff going on here. And, you know, if it's God's will to happen, it's going to happen. Nothing will get in the way. And I trust that. I love you all. Even if I haven't met you, I love you because I know that you're here for much the same reason that I was here, because you might have a people problem. And there's hope and help here. And with that, I love you guys. Thank you. Mwah. And that's all I have to share.